Alright, so now we're on to video 2, Lights and Rendering Setup. This setup is going to take you through a lot of the processes that you'll be using for many of these videos here. Um, there you go. So we want to make sure that we understand these things fully. That's why I have a separate video just dedicated to these things, just so you understand, what we're doing here. Okay. Now the first one, that's the major thing that we're going to cover, which is linear workflow. Okay, and the rest of it is just how to set up a linear workflow for specific situations. Spell words right. Oh, there we go. So what linear workflow is basically it allows us to get more accurate color setups here. So if we look at this little thing here, that's a cool little drawing there. There we go. So what we have here, this is basically this is your monitor, okay? And your monitor is only able to show a certain amount of colors, all right? So what happens is your computer does calculations on a certain range of values, and then it outputs them like this, okay? So if you look at this, you have basically, let's say this is, let me find a better graph. There we go. So we have basically 255 colors for each channel, okay? And this is a value of 0 to 1. So if you look at this here, this is 128 right here. Let's just say that's the halfway mark, okay? Because basically it's the halfway between 0 and 255. If we took this color and we looked at the value, it's 0.2, okay? So if we were to double 0.2, we would get 0.4. That ends up like being over here. Well, that doesn't really make sense, because if I doubled 128, I should get basically like double the value, right? I should get like all the way over here. It should be, further down, but it's not, okay? So what we need to do is we need to work on this like linear path. And what would happen here, let's say at 128, we're at 0.5. If I double 0.5, I go all the way up to 1. If I cut 0.5 in half, I go to 0.25, okay? And then we get 64 here and 128 there. And it all makes much more sense, okay? You don't need to really understand the graph so much as understand that this is why we're doing it, all right? So what linear workflow does is we try to get our monitors or our software to calculate based on this straight line so that all the math that it does is perfectly mathematically correct, okay? Because obviously if we doubled the value at 128, which is 0.2, we get 0.4, but it's not really we're doubled because over here this is only like 160 or 170 or so, okay? So we want to get it on this blue graph. So the way we get on the blue graph is we invert it. So basically we're popping in an inverse graph, which is what this top one is, and that inverse graph is what makes it balance out, all right? So you just have to understand that's what we're doing, okay? So essentially what happens is the calculations in Maya are wrong, and then we have to tell it that we want to calculate the right things by putting in an inverse gamma correction. All right. So when you hear linear workflow, this is what we're talking about. Okay. And this is something that's very important in creating realistic stuff. And our assignments that we're creating are part of that. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new project inside of Maya, and this is just going to be playing around. I recommend that you always have a playing around project that you can just go to and just play around. Just create some stuff and then just see what happens and go from there. Okay. So in this playing around one, we're going to go and set this up. All right. So I'm going to go to my render settings first. That's the first spot that I want to go. We're not going to do it through Maya software. All of the rendering we do for this class, or I'm going to say 90% of it, is going to be done through Mental Ray. And the only reason I say 90% is because I believe everything's through Mental Ray, but one assignment might be, and I just can't think of it right now. So we're using Mental Ray for this, and that will allow us to set up the proper settings so that we can do a linear workflow. Okay, so Maya 2014, we set this to Mental Ray. We're good as far as that goes. I need to come down here and I say enable color management. Okay, what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, anything that comes in, I want Maya to treat it as an sRGB image, and then anything that goes out, I want it to be a linear sRGB image. Okay, this is basically a gamma corrected image. This is a non-gamma corrected image. Okay, so if I go in here to my source images, Oops, not that one. There we go. I go right here to my leather texture. This here is a gamma corrected image, okay? Meaning that the colors of it have been adjusted to display on our monitors correctly, all right? So what's going to happen is when we bring that image into Maya, it's going to treat it as a regular image, as a, you know, the graph we looked at it's not going to really consider that. It's just going to look at it as a regular image and do all the math on it, and that's where it becomes incorrect. So we check this thing on to tell it that we're bringing in an sRGB image, and that tells it that we want to correct these things, okay? So if I just created, just for fun, I'll create a sphere, and I'm just going to put a new material on here. And all the materials that we're going to use are going to be MIA material X passes, okay? So this is just a tester, just so you can see what it is. And I'm just going to connect that file to that. All right. So now if I hit 6, and let's go here, just do a little render. Okay. So now here is our texture that's been adjusted. Now if we look at this here, if you look at this color and you look at this color, right now they're not displaying the correct way, okay? Because what's happening is it's taking this image, it's uncolor correcting it, so it's getting it back to a linear state so we get the actual color information, and then it's putting it out here with that actual color information, okay? So what we need to do is we need to tell it that, okay, we want to do the math on the color correction here, but I want to see what the color corrected version looks like, because our end result will be color corrected, but we want all the math to be uncolor corrected. All right. So what this little checkbox does is just say reset it so that all of these textures that we're bringing in are back to the same color. All right. So, or the correct math for it. So we need to have this checked on, but when we check it on, then we get the wrong color in here. Okay. So I need to go up to my display color management inside my render view. And I need to tell it that the image that I'm giving the render view is a linear image. Okay, if you remember this, we said we're giving it an sRGB, we're sending out a linear. Okay, that was in the render settings. In the display color management, we need to say, okay, we're giving you a linear image and we're outputting an sRGB image. So now when we render it, what we're getting is something that looks much more realistic as far as what the coloring was. All right, so if we look at the color here, we look at the color there, you can see how those two colors are pretty much the same thing, or exactly the same thing. Okay, that's what we want to happen. All right. Now this little button here, this will do it for any images that we bring in. All right. Now I could come into each image and I could set it right here to, you know, this is an sRGB. No big deal. But this is just the default. That's why it says use default input, default input. Okay, so I don't have to set it for each image. But what's going to happen is, let's say I don't have a file on here. Let's say I just have a color. So I'm going to pick just this, let's say something like that. Okay, so I'm going to pick that color, and I'm just going to render it. And if you look at this color here and we look at this color here, those two colors are not the same. Okay, and you have to be aware of this because usually what happens is we don't pay attention to it, and then right before we're done and we're ready to render, then we realize it, and then we have problems, and then we have to go back and fix a lot of stuff. So what we need to do is on these colors, there's no way for me to take this and make it an sRGB or a color corrected thing right here. Okay, I can't just say, you know, punch in these values and it's a color corrected one. But what I can do is I can click on this map next to color. So here's my color. I'm going to click on the map. And I'm going to go down to utilities, and I'm going to go in here and find gamma correct. Okay, and this will correct the gamma for it. So if I punch in that color, here it is. Okay, right now it's saying what gamma are you trying to correct? And right now it's just set to 1. Okay, meaning that there's no color correction. We're going to get the exact same results. Okay, so what I want to do is I need to take this and tell it that I need to basically punch in the opposite. So 0.454, some geniuses have figured out that that's the magical number for doing this. And we punch 0.454 here, and now we're getting this color. So you can see the color there and there match much closer to what we had before. Okay. All right. So there we go. So now that's it. So that's basically the linear workflow in a nutshell. Okay. But it gets more complicated as we go, because you have to consider, you know, what do we need to put that gamma correct on? Okay. It's just colors that we're using. But if I went to, let's say I went down to reflectivity, you'll see that there's no color input for reflectivity. It's just a value, 0.5. So if I click on here and I wanted to put, let's say, a ramp on this, I don't need to do a color correct for this, because all it's doing is reading this value. It's not reading any color information at all. It's just reading that value that we have inside here. Okay. So all these values are 1, so essentially this reflectivity, even though it's reading 0.3, is actually going to be 1. Okay. Now if I click on this and I decide that I do want to have a ramp on here, I can't just click a ramp, okay? Because again, it won't color correct that ramp. If we look at it, you'll see that these colors are heavily washed out. They don't look right at all. And what it needs is it needs to have that gamma correct. So anytime you're using a 2D texture, 3D texture, you need to have that gamma correct on there. So under utilities, gamma, there you are. Put the 0.454 for the gamma. Click the map for the value. I'll find ramp again. And now what that's going to do is it's going to color correct the ramp so that it displays correctly. And you'll see the colors here, the blue and the green. And if we saw a little bit of the red, there it is. Those would all be displayed correctly. They would all be displayed based on what colors we've chosen here, and not this funky math that we have set up. Okay? So the tip of this is that anytime you have anything except for a file going into a color, you need to gamma correct. Okay? So for this, if I'm choosing something like that color there, I can't just pick that color. I need to go through and gamma correct it. Your scene will not look realistic at all. It'll look very washed out. It'll look very fake. And the goal of this class is to start creating stuff that's more professional, more realistic looking. Okay? If it's something like this, where it's basically a scalar value is what these are called, basically a value from 0 to 1, or sometimes you can push it above 1. It's not reading any color information. These ones you don't need to do that to. Okay? So even down here, I don't need to do it for this. I would need to do it for that. I don't need to do it for this or this. But if I came into here and I wanted to use this color at max distance, I would have to use that. Okay? Now, the only exceptions to this rule are there are certain colors that are basically they're not affected by the gamma curve. There we go. Let's go here. There. Okay. So if we look at this, 0, which is black as far as the color goes, and 1 up here, which is white, you'll see that in all 3 of these lines, they all converge. Okay? So if you have a true black color or a true white color, you don't need to gamma correct them. But when you start getting into the grays, you would. So if I chose perfect black for this color here, it's going to be hard to see. When I render it out, you'll see that it does look perfectly black. If I start going into the gray, though, it's going to start to wash that gray out. The closer I get it to that center line, the closer it's going to be getting washed out. Okay? And then it's going to start to converge and go back. So now I'm at white. You'll see that the white is going to look much more realistic and much more white. Now the same thing is going to go true for any of these pure colors like pure red, pure green, or pure blue. Those are the only 3. Because our monitors are configured with red, green, blue, these colors are not affected. So I can choose pure red without gamma correcting it. Now if you keep that in mind and you just gamma correct everything, it's not going to affect it. So to be safe, you could always just gamma correct everything as far as colors go. Okay. Now this is also true for lights. So if I added a light in here, and I'll just create a ground plane. and I rendered it out. Okay, even though we're seeing this like whitish look to this, even though we're seeing white here, it's because it's white, it's pure white. But if I chose something like that green, it's going to be hard to tell because we're actually mixing colors, but that's not going to be the green we're getting. We're getting a washed out version of this green. So I should go into this color, go to gamma correct, and you notice how I can type up here, GA for gamma, click on utilities, and then I can just click it. And then choose that color. And then what I'm going to get is a true representation of that green that I've chosen here as that color. Okay, so keep that in mind that we want to have that thing set up. All right, so let me just make a new scene, and I'm just going to go through that process real quick, okay, because I don't want you to get bogged down with the details of it when you're setting it up, but you do need to know what to do when you do it. So every single new scene that you do, the first thing you should do is just go in here and just start setting mental ray as your renderer, enable color management. We're also going to set up this. I'm going to set up my image format to OpenEXR. Okay. Single frame is fine. In Maya 2014, 960 by 540 is the default. If you're working in 2013, you'll need to change that. I also go down to render options and turn off the default light. Okay, so these are just basic render settings that I go through every single time. We'll also notice that I also want to go to image compression and change this to RLE. Under quality, under frame buffer, we're rendering it at 4 by 16. That means we're getting a 16-bit image out of here. If we render this as an if, there's no problem with that. But some things we may actually want to render as a 32-bit, and ifs aren't supported there. So just keep that in mind that we may change this at some point. Okay, so that's there. I'm going to click on this render view, which is this little blue box. I'm going to go to options, display, color management, and say my input is going to be linear, my output or display is going to be sRGB. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have to do. And then for any materials that I make, I just have to make sure that I choose the MIA material X passes. And then I have to make sure that I choose to do a gamma correct. There we go. 0.454. And then pick the color that I want. Okay, or let me zoom in on this just so we can get a closer view. Okay, there's the gamma corrected yellowish color. Oh, I don't have a light in my scene because I turned that off, so let me just create a light. I'm just going to create a directional light just for this. There we go. So now we have this color that we've chosen here. Or we can go there and pick one of these other colors, like I could do crater. There we go. And then we're going to get the exact colors from this instead of the uncolor corrected ones. Okay. And just for fun, I guess, let me just duplicate this. And I'll make a new Mia. And I'll just put that same crater just on this other one, just so you can see a side by side. Here's the washed out one. You can see the colors look very blah. And then here is the color corrected one. All right. And let me put that back. Because of how this crater material behaves, just need to make sure I copy that 3D texture also. There we go. So you can see the colors are definitely different here than they are there. Here, they're much more true to what they were. Here, they're a bit washed out. Okay? All right, so every scene you come into, same thing. Render settings, enable color management, OpenEXR, where are you at? Oh, I'm still in Maya software. Let's change that to mental ray. Then OpenEXR. There we go. And then RLE compression. 960 by 540, render options, enable default color off. And then just for fun, we'll just go to frame buffer and just verify it's 4 by 16. Okay. Then we go to our render settings or our render view, display color management, and then just set this image color profile to linear, displayed sRGB. So write these colors, these values down just so you have exactly what you need to do every single time you create anything inside of the scenes that we're doing. Now there's a couple assignments we're not using linear workflow just because they're specific to what output we want out of them, so we won't be using those. Okay, so that covers the linear workflow. I'm going to go through the Mia shader and the gamma correction we covered already. All right, so the Mia shader, if you've had any experience with this before, you kind of have an idea of how it works. There's two that are showing up in 2014. There's actually three that'll show up in 2013, but one of them is now obsolete. The X and the X passes. Every single time, you want to pick this X passes one and not the X. Okay? If I turn that off, just type that in, you can see there's the X passes. So every single time we want X passes. Okay? And we'll get the shading group, which has, basically nothing right now. We'll go to the passes, and I'll just call this Mia color testing 01. Okay. So what I want to do is we have in here, we want to go through and just kind of outline some of these properties. The color is essentially the color, what we're looking at. What is the actual color of this object? Okay. So if I go into here and I want to do a gamma correct so I can pick a color, or actually I'll just do a file. So let me just bring a file in. I'll just bring that leather picture in. Okay, now remember I don't need to gamma correct this because I've set it up already inside of my render settings. Okay, that's why this one doesn't get gamma corrected. We'll render this out and we'll take a look. Okay, I'll add a light in here too. We're going to be mainly sticking with two lights. The ambient lights don't work with Mia's. We have directional, we have point, spot, and area. Most of the time you can stick to point or area. Sometimes you need spot, sometimes you need directional. Okay, so area lights I like to use the most. So I'm going to use an area light. And I'm just positioning it. Now you'll see that I got two manipulators there. I hit the letter T, and that brings up this other manipulator that allows me to point it. Okay, so one is like the pointer, and one is the source. So I can just point it at that guy. Let's get that back. There we go. Alright, so let's render this out. And we'll take a look at some of the properties of this thing. Alright, so here's my material. And there's the color, okay? Now if I take the weight off, you'll see that this goes black. This weight is a representation of this color. Okay, now why would you want to change the weight of this? Well, some properties are going to have more or less of the actual color showing through. For instance, if I turn this off and then I just hit save and do a render, it's not going to be terribly apparent what's happening here. Okay, but let me just create some other things in the scene and then we'll see if that's a little bit more apparent. Okay, so I just have some gray cubes in there, just so we have something else. Okay, so I took the diffuse down, or the diffuse weight down. Let me grab that again. And then what we're getting here is we're getting the reflection. Okay, so now we have this other property that's down here, which is reflection, that's adding to what we're seeing. Okay. So the reflectivity is only at 0.6, so that's why we're not seeing a full-blown reflectivity here. So I'm going to pull this up to 1. I'm going to render it, and it's still not going to be like a perfectly chrome sphere. Okay. If you think about it, what color is a chrome sphere? Well, it's actually the color of the environment. And right now, the environment in here is black, so we're seeing black. It's reflecting all of these perfectly, but then we're seeing this black area because that's what's in the scene. Okay. So we'll see more of this as we go, okay? But this here, we may want certain areas to be a little bit more color, a little bit more reflection. So that's why we have a map here. You typically don't just slide this down. Sometimes you do. But usually you'll take this and map something to it. You'll connect something here, like let's say, and because it's a weighted object, a 0 to 1, we don't need to pump in a gamma correct. Okay, so let's just say I did a checkerboard. All right, so in some of these areas on this, it's going to be full color. In some of these areas, it's going to be 0 color. So there you can see how we're manipulating how much of that diffuse is coming through. And I could change this up a little bit too. And basically it allows me to, let's say I had a checkerboard floor, and part of the checkerboard floor was just a little bit, less vibrant than the other part of the checkerboard floor. I could do something like this to create that illusion, okay? I'm really surprised not showing more of that. There we go. Okay, so now we're getting that where we're seeing these two different values in there. All right. There's also this roughness, and the roughness is basically how the shading is spreading out over the surface. Okay, so let me just save this and render that little chunk. And you can see the before and the after. I should take one without any roughness. There you go. So you can see how the shading is just spreading out further around that surface. Okay, it's just a little bit different look to it is all. And a lot of these are going to be like that. A lot of these you just have to experiment with and see what they're going to do. I'm going to go through some of the highlight ones, and then you can play with the other ones on your own. Here's reflectivity, which we already kind of touched, and this is just the amount of reflection. Take that off, and you'll see we get 0 reflection on here. Okay, there's reflection before, and no reflection. Now, one of the cool things about the Mias compared to like the blends or the Fongs is that they're supposed to be physically accurate. Okay, meaning that if this is 100% reflective, it's not going to read as 100% reflective. Okay, it's not going to like push as 100% reflective and 100% color. It's going to do a little blending between them. Okay, and the old ones it would. Also, if you get rid of the reflectivity is actually a reflection, reflects your light source. So we don't see the light source now that that's gone. So what I can do is I'll take this up, and you can see how, oops. You can see how shiny this is. Well, I can take this glossiness and pull this down if I want to spread out that light source. There you go. So now it's hazing it a little bit and kind of pixelating it a little bit. I'll take it down even more. And this is how we're going to be able to get different looks of things by emulating different reflectivity properties and different diffuse properties. And then some of these other properties that we're going to go through as well. Okay, now we also have this, which is glossy samples. I want to get rid of the color on here and just do a solid color. I'm just going to do something like a light blue. Okay, so if we look at this, you can see there's a lot of grain happening in here, all right? And that grain is coming from this glossy samples. So what I can do is I can take this up and just go to, let's say, 32. And now you'll see that this looks a lot smoother, okay? Now there's also, in our render settings, there are some settings we can change as well, but we don't want to up these yet, okay? But that's what the glossy samples is going to do. We'll just keep this in mind that this is what we want to happen. All right, I'm also going to take this down, or this glossiness back up, just so we can see some of these other settings. Okay, I'm going to take this highlight only on, and you'll see that our reflection actually goes away. We just have the highlight in here and no reflectivity. Okay, it actually makes it look very fake. Sometimes you actually just want the reflection for certain items. There's also this metal material, and what this metal material does is it's kind of hard to see in this other one. Let me take this off. Let me save. Let me render. You'll see that my reflections are now colored. Okay. When I have metal material on, it colors my reflections to the color of the material. So my blocks over here that were white or gray, you see that they get that blue tint in there. Okay. So a lot of these things that we're seeing are basically different ways we can emulate different types of surfaces. And I don't need that, I need this. And when we do this one, we'll talk more about these specific things and how to emulate these specific items right there. Okay. There's also this great thing, if you just go to Google and type in Mia material PDF. This first one is this mental ray document. And if I just wait until that's done, there we go, open it. And this is going to walk you through a lot of these things that I'm just kind of like glancing over. There's a lot of stuff to read, and a lot of it is very interesting, but I really like this part here where it goes through and says, here's reflectivity from 0, no reflectivity, all the way to 1. And you can see they have that chrome that's on there. And then here's at 0.8, here's at 0.4. Okay, here's transparency from 0, 0.4, 0.8, 1. Okay, so it'll give you some kind of before and afters, which are great to see. Okay, so let's go down. So here's advanced reflection. I'm not going to get too much into this except to say let's create a little ground here. Use my snap tools. Snap to the bottom of that. Let me hide some of these guys. And we'll just do a, oops, I'm going to put a Mia material on this ground. And it didn't color correct the gray. We'll, get to it. I'm not too concerned about color correcting that right now. Okay, so right now you can see the reflection of that ball in the ground. And I'll even crank the reflectivity up some so we can really see it. Okay, so what I can do is if I take this use max distance and I set it to, let's say, 1, what it's going to do is it's going to cut that reflection off. You see, we don't even see the reflection. Let's take this up to maybe 10. Alright, let's take it somewhere in between. There we go. So now you can see how I'm adjusting that reflection without adjusting the sharpness of it. Okay, so it's just not going to go too far into that surface. We can also have it fade to a color, and just for fun, let me click on here. We'll do a gamma correct. I'll pick some crazy color like this bright yellowy color. And you can see how I've tinted those reflections a bit. Okay, so now I'm starting to get different results on here based on some of these other settings. Okay, there's this max trace step that's also here, and I'll show that once we get more of a complete scene set up, but I'm not going to do it right now. All right, we also have index of refraction. Let me do that to the sphere. I'm going to go to index, there it is, index of refraction. Now this is your transparency, okay, transparency. So if I pull this off, and I hit render, essentially what we're seeing is that the ball is transparent. Now not only is it transparent, but we have this look to it where it's actually distorting the objects behind it. And that's what's called refraction. It's actually like it's a physical property that occurs in nature. Index of refraction. Now what does that number mean? That number, which is right here, index of refraction, refers to, not that, minimize that, it refers to this refractive index. Okay, different objects are going to bend the light more or less. So in this case, if we go down to the bottom here, air has an index of refraction of 1.000293. Okay, Helium is 1.000036. Here we go. Water is 1.33. And the one they have set to 1.6 is right about here, crown glass or flint glass, actually closer to flint glass. And there's actually a bigger list too. There's actually like a huge list of different items that are index of refraction. Here's diamond 2.417. Okay, so ideally what you want to do is, if you know what you're trying to create, you can punch in that number. Okay, 1.7. And what that's going to do is it's going to bend the light more. The higher the number, the more it's going to bend that object. All right, 1.1, very little bending, a little bit of distortion in there. Okay. Now we also have, if you look at this, the reason why it may look kind of funky here is that we're distorting it one way, but on the other side we're doing something completely different. Okay. So if I took this and let me just delete that sphere, and I'll create a plane. And I'm just going to assign that Mia color testing blue color that we had. And because we don't have the two sides to it, we're going to get a little bit of a different look to it. Okay, you'll see that it is only distorting. If we look right here, it's distorting it a little bit, not a whole lot. Okay. Now we also have glossiness, which just like this glossiness up here is going to basically blur that refraction. So if I take this glossiness down, we'll save this image, re-render it. It's going to create more of like a frosted glass as opposed to just like this solid sheet of glass. Okay, and you can see all the grain that's happening in here. That grain is also, if you look at right here underneath, the glossy samples. Okay, so we can play with that as well. There's also a max distance for this and some of the same properties that we had for the other one. There's also a thin-walled or a solid. There's a refractive caustic or a transparent shadow and some other properties as well. Okay, so some of these we'll have to play with as we go just to understand them better. I want you to get just a sense of what we can do with this and not necessarily go crazy with, adjusting all of these right now to get it exactly the way we want. All right, so I'm going to just shrink this down a little bit. Oops, let me make my sphere. Let me assign color again. And then the next one we're going to cover is just reset some of the properties on it. All right, that's good. It was off. BRDF. So what this is a different way to reflect things. You'll see in here, it's basically it's not reflecting perfectly all the way around, but it is reflecting much more uniformly around it. By checking this box on, this is going to allow me to adjust how the reflections are happening on that surface. You'll see that there's very little reflection here, but there's a lot of reflection happening around the edges. And if you were to look at, let's say, an image of a car here, the reflections are not uniform. You actually get different reflections depending on the angle you're looking at the vehicle. Okay? So something like that. You see, we don't have, we have some reflections here, and it kind of trickles off a little bit. So that's what we're getting with this BRDF. And I can take this reflectivity and glossiness up. I can add more objects and obviously some more light in the scene because I'm kind of hitting it at a weird angle. There we go. Okay, and depending on where my camera is pointed is where we're going to get these reflections. I'm going to go more head on. All right, so you can see how those reflections are happening around there. Now we could also come in here and not use this for now, but then punch these things in manually. Okay, so if I said, this is 0 and this is 1, you'll see that my reflections are now going to be more in the center and less towards the outside. Okay, so on the outside I have very little reflection. In the center I have a whole lot of reflection. Okay, and I can dial that down and dial this one up. Okay, so as we start developing these shaders and start to play with them, we really want to understand where some of these properties are coming from and how to adjust them to get the look that we're after. Okay, and a lot of these settings are going to be things that we need to play with in order for all of that to happen. And that PDF right there, this PDF that we have here is really going to assist in that. You can see that's what we're talking about right there. There's that. Here's the transparency thing, solid wall versus thin walled. We'll get to some of this stuff in a little bit. Okay, so I definitely want you to look through this thing. You don't have to memorize it. There's not going to be a test on it. But I want you to see all the examples so that when you say, you know what, I really want to have this metal that's like a brushed metal, there you go. There's where you can kind of start your process of understanding what to do for that. Okay. There's also, if we look at anisotropy, our specular right now is basically a straight line or a straight dot. So this anisotropy takes that and it spreads it out. We'll put this up to 50. And you'll see that it's no longer straight. It's more on an angle. And then I can rotate this around as well. Oops. There we go. That up. Just make sure that my reflection's up. Yes, it is. Okay. Okay, so we can adjust what that's looking like too. And because it's on a sphere, we're getting this kind of look, but on different objects, we would get more or less anisotropy based on these settings that we have here. Okay. There's also translucency, which it's kind of like a fake. But I don't even know if it's going to show anything. No, it's not. I don't really use translucency in here because there's another way to do that that we'll eventually get into. Okay, and then there are some other settings in here that eventually we'll get to. Bump map is an important one. There's two different bump maps here. Okay, in my experience, I haven't found a huge difference in using either one of these for which one you want to use. I typically use a standard bump as just what we've always done before. And this overall bump, if you're going to use something called the Mia, let's see, cube, there we go. And I'll assign that. Let's render this out just so you can see this. All right, basic cube, nothing fancy, okay? And here I can go to this overall bump, and I can add in a what's called the rounded corners. Give it a little radius, render that out, and what we'll see is that it actually has rounded corners now. Okay, that's too big a radius. There we go. Okay, so it just gives us rounding to it without actually rounding it, but that one has to go into the overall and not the standard. Right, so it just gives you a way not to even have to add any geometry, but just kind of round off the corners and just break them up so it doesn't look so CG. Okay, nothing in the real world has rounded or square corners like that. And then I could take my standard bump, and because this it's not reading any color information, I could just pump in anything here. So I can go to File and just drop in that leather file. And I get this funky, sparkly thing, and I can just take my bump depth and lower that just so I get something a little bit more pleasant. Okay, so bump map, the BRDF, anisotropy, refraction, reflection, and diffuse are where you're going to play most of the time in here. There's also one under advanced, which is this additional color. And let's go back to this. When we get into light surfaces, that's where this is going to play a huge role. Okay, so if I wanted this surface here, let's pretend that this wasn't blue. Let's just, oops, I didn't want to break that. There we go. Let's pretend it's that color. I don't want to have these bumps on here. Let me just delete these. But let's say I wanted this thing to light stuff up. I wanted it to be like basically like a light. So I would go into the advanced section, and under this additional color here, I would click the advanced, and then I would add in what's called a light surface, MIA light surface. And then inside this, if I hit the render button, what we're going to see is that that object is now illuminating part of the scene. There it is. Okay. Now it's not going to be totally apparent right now because it's kind of like a fake illumination. So I have to go into my render settings, and under indirect lighting, I have to turn on final gather. Okay. It's basically pushing light out of it. So now that we have this on, you'll see that we have a little bit more light in this foreground area because of that final gather. Okay, and I'll even, just so we can see it, let me just hide this light. Okay, and then you can see that thing is now lighting up this whole area. And I can take that and adjust it even further. There we go. I can change the color, just like we've done before. So I can put a gamma on this. And then give it a color of, let's say, blue. And then I'll take the final gather contribution and turn that up. I'm going to take its intensity and turn that down. And I'll take my reflection, put that up as well. Okay, just a couple settings just to tweak it. Okay, so it's hard to see. There's a little bit of a blue glow down here. We pulled in some of this blue color. We pulled in some of the original color back in. I'll even make it more apparent just to kind of push these numbers just so it's a little bit more obvious in the video. There you go. It should be a bit more obvious now that we have this blue halo on the bottom. Okay, so that's where we are kind of seeing this thing work. All right, so we can actually have that be a glowing object, and when we get to passes and stuff, you really see that that thing come into shape. Okay. All right, so that's where I'm going to leave this one, and then next we're going to start talking about. It's not that. Next we'll start talking about some of these other ways to kind of light our scene, and using color temperature to do some of that stuff. Okay, so we've covered a couple of these other things. The next part that I want to cover is different ways to light our stuff inside here. Alright, so we're going to start off with a brand new scene. And I'm going to go in here and just create a ground plane. There we go. I can use my little shortcut key, make also like a sphere. There we go. Okay, so I have a ground, I have a sphere, and I want to light these. So I'm going to start off with the basics first. So I'm going to go through and just do an area light. Like we've talked about, or I've mentioned before, I really prefer using area lights for lots of things. And the one thing about area lights that might be, a little bit different than you might be used to is the fact that an area light, if I use this, you'll see that there's no light over here and lots of light right there, especially like right here. Also, this is through Maya software, so you'll see that this side of the ball has a very harsh black area. This is very white, and then we have this little transition here. So let me swap this over to Mental Ray. Let me go through and do our settings that we had before. OpenEXR, RLE, 960 by 540 is good. I'll turn the default light off, not that that matters now. And oops, quality. I'm just checking my frame buffer. We're at 4 by 16. Okay. And then I'm going to go in here to my color management and change this to linear sRGB. Alright, so just for fun, I'll re-render this. Okay, you'll see by just changing the settings, I haven't even touched the light, just changing the settings, we're getting a much nicer, smoother look to this whole thing. Okay, also we're getting a shadow right here. Alright, so it's not just mental ray doing it, but it's a lot of other stuff. Okay, now the back side of this ball is not getting lit up. And the reason it's not getting lit up is because there's no bounce to the light. It's just kind of like going out, and that's it. So I'm going to go into the render settings and go to indirect lighting and turn on final gather. Okay, I'm also going to just lower my settings here, 50, 0.5, and 50. Okay, 50, 0.5, 50. And then render this again. And then immediately you'll see that we're getting some of that light bouncing around. Now you'll see that it looks kind of grainy right now, but then it's going to start to fill in and smooth out. So the light shoots out of the light, it hits the ground, bounces, and then comes up. Now you'll notice that the shadow is not lit up at all. Like, okay, the light's hitting the ground, bouncing, hitting the ball, and lighting that up. Well, the ball's not bouncing and hitting this again. Okay, I'd have to go up there and turn on secondary bounces, and I could turn this up to 1, 2, 3, whatever. And the higher I go with this, the more realistic this could possibly look. It's not going to be a cure-all, but it'll definitely help in making it look like these things are interacting more with each other. Okay, so it might be hard to see in the video, but there's definitely a little bit more illumination in the shadow now because of that. Okay. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So I'm going to go through and just change a setting on here, because now that we're getting into more realistic stuff, this is going to start to take longer. Right? So I'm going to go up to Options, Test Resolution, and set this to 50%. And it's always a good idea to do stuff like this when you're rendering, because that way your rendering is going to come out, you know, half size, but it'll be a lot quicker. And if I'm just looking at the lighting, I don't need it to be full-blown, you know, 960 by 540. Alright, there we go. See, that's good enough for us to judge what the lighting looks like, and we can still zoom in and see some of those details. Okay. Now you may notice over here there's a little bit of noise happening. It might be hard to see in the video, but there's a little bit of noise happening in here because along with our final gather hitting this, it's also kind of bouncing back and lighting up some of this stuff. So that's always going to be a game we're going to have to play with Final Gather, that we get these kinds of weird artifacty type things. Alright, so I'm going to adjust some things inside here as well. So here's my light. It's an area light. I'm going to go down, I'm going to turn decay rate on. Okay, decay rate as no decay is not realistic at all. Okay, if I go back to my render view, this light, even though it looks like we have some drop off here, we're not getting the accurate drop off that we should have. I'm going to take this to quadratic and then just do a rendering, and what we're going to see is that our light is probably, yeah, it's very, very invisible. Alright, get a little bit of light, but it's not as much as it was. Once we hit this to quadratic, now the light's dropping off in a much more harsher fashion, so that means we have to take this intensity up. And depending on how big our scene is, we may have to take this intensity up to hundreds or thousands or whatever, lots bigger numbers. Okay. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to come down here to mental ray, and I'm going to say use the light shape. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's actually going to use this light shape to say, okay, this is where the light's coming from. Make the shadows look more realistic based on this light coming out of that shape. So if you look at the shadows, they're very, very grainy. This should fix some of that. It's not going to fix all of it, but it'll fix some. Okay, so now we're not as grainy at all. You see the shadows look much nicer, much more realistic. Oops, wrong button again. Alright, and we're getting some shadowy stuff here. And again, here's that sample number. Just like we had with the reflections, we have this high sample number right there. So we can play with that as well to make the shadows less grainy by adjusting that number. Alright, now there's also this visible. If I click this visible on and render it out, we'll see that we actually get, you know, here is that light shape. Here is what it looks like. If I flip my camera around to the front of it, I'll actually see that white box right there. And I can take the intensity of this up more if I'm seeing that, it's not looking super bright. There you go. So now it's a bit brighter. Obviously, it stops at 10, but I could type in like 100 and push that look a little bit further than what it was. Okay, and a lot of this is just going to be scene dependent. Okay, so it's nothing that's going to be always do this and always do that. It's never going to be an always situation. All right, so that's that there. I'm going to get into some of these light shaders in a little bit, but that's just the area light. Okay, and most of the time I try to use area lights for lots of things because they're much more realistic than a point light or a spotlight. Because if I had like a tube light, I can make it like this. If I had whatever, I could do that. Change the shape and size of it. And it really depends on how big this shape is as to how much light is coming out of it. Me just changing the size of that, you'll see now I have it's not as big of a transition there. Let me shrink this. But let's say I just really, huge, made this thing enormous. Okay, you can see how it really spreads the light out a lot more than it did before. Okay, and there's a lot more grain happening inside here. Okay, if I shrink it down, you'll see the light's a bit more focused, a bit smoother. The shadows are a bit sharper. Okay, so we just get a much more realistic look using an area light. All right, so now the other light that we can look at is we can look at a spotlight. These definitely have their uses. And their settings are pretty much going to be similar. We always want to use a decay rate on here. Okay, and again, up the intensity so we can see it. There we go. And then if you look at the light on here, you'll see that there's a definite cone shape. Okay, so I can take this cone angle up if I want to adjust what that's looking like. There we go. I can also take this penumbra angle up. If you watch this little shape here, I take this up to 10, you'll see how just the edges become softened. Okay, so now the edges are much softer. The middle is still pretty much the same. I'm going to take the drop off and put that at 10 also. And then you'll see that there's an intensity shift. Right here it's very bright, and then it dims out. So now we're creating a much softer look to this. And this definitely can have its uses. Okay, but you'll see that the shadow is pretty much still harsh. All right, so I'm going to go down to mental ray again, and on here I'm going to click area light. And then what we're going to see, let me save the one before and click the render button again. What we're going to see is that it's still using that shape, but now we have this area light here that's also kind of helping give us more of the look of what this should look like. Okay, so even when I use this spotlight, I'll typically turn the area light on just so I get that. And then we can change the shape of this too. I can make this, instead of a rectangle, I can make it a disc. Okay, and that gives us more of a round look. It was looking kind of square before. Now it's a bit rounder. And I can also turn the visible on. That way I can see just the disc. It's not going to show the whole cone. It'll just show that disc right there. If I'm lined up correctly. Alright, it should be showing it. Is it showing it? No. It should show it. Something might be funky in 2014 or my computer right now, but that should be showing it. And you'll see also we have these light shaders and photon emitters that are down here we can play with also. Okay, so typically I stick with quadratic, play with the intensity, adjust the cone angle, the penumbra angle, the drop off. come down here and check this on. And then this one, instead of having one area where you adjust the samples, there's two. So that's the big difference there. Okay, so that's spotlight. There's also point light, and for point light I'm actually going to create a cube. So we can play with this a little bit better. Let's scoot the ball over here. Okay, I'm going to do a little rendering. Okay, now this point light is just illuminating everything. All right, right now it's just a default point light. There's no decay to it, so you can really see where this entire scene is being lit up. And obviously this looks really, really fake. It's also bouncing around so that it looks double fake. So let's turn quadratic on. We're probably going to push it up to 10 at least. Okay, this hot spot right here is where it's hitting the wall. Because I have it basically like intersecting with the wall, it's just really, really bright right there. Okay, now this is going to look, I pulled it away a little bit so not hitting it. This is going to look pretty fake right now just because of how it's interacting. This also has a mental ray section, but it doesn't have like area light. Okay, this one actually has something else in here. If I go down to the bottom, it has this thing called a light profile. And the light profile is where we can punch in what's called an IES profile. Okay, and an IES profile is basically going to take our point light and give it this kind of look. Okay, not all of this, but just like here's one point light, here's another, here's another. And these are basically light intensity maps from light bulb manufacturers. So if we go to, here's like, read more information about it. Here's understanding what these things are going to look like. But you can download these things from lighting manufacturers. So it says download from here. There's a good spot where you can just download this viewer so you can view them. And then here's a lighting manufacturer, Lithonia, which has, here are, oops, where'd they go? Resources, photometrics. And then here is where they would have those IES profiles. The only issue you're ever going to have with this is that, you don't know what these things are. So a lot of times you just have to download them and see what they look like. So I can go to commercial industrial fluorescent, I can go to surface lights, and I can download any of these IES profiles. Okay, so I have some of these that I put inside my source images right here. So I'm just going to go to my light profile and click the map button, and it'll see how it automatically connects it. It automatically knows what we want to connect there. So all I have to do is go to this folder and pick on one of these light profiles. And then I can hit the render button again. Okay. Now what we're seeing is this light is just kind of really dim now because of just the light profile. So I'm going to click on the spotlight or the point light again. I'm going to take the intensity up. I took it up to 50, and then we'll render it again. And now we're getting this light emitting something. Okay. Now you'll also notice that it's pointing basically down. It's not pointing like in a point light that you might be used to, points in all directions. Well, this one is now vertically pointing down. So I can rotate this light and change where that light profile is kind of shooting. Okay, so very quickly, very coolly, I can do something like that. Okay, and then if I decided, oh, I really don't like the way that profile is looking, I can go down here to that light profile, click the arrow, and grab a different one. Hopefully I grabbed a different one. Oops, let me back up a little bit. There we go. And then it might look a little bit grainy. I could always come over here and up this resolution. I can say 60 by 60. and that may help increase the resolution of that profile a little bit. Yep, you can definitely see a little bit of a change there. Sometimes they're just going to be a little bit, a little bit low res, and you just have to find one that's going to work for you. Okay, and then sometimes when you're looking for these profiles, you'll actually see an ad pops up. There you go. See, here's like light 1, light 2, light 3, light 4. How this guy is using that to emulate different structures in there. Okay, it makes it much more realistic, much cooler. There's the viewer, there's a generator, and there's a IES file. Okay, so you can download other ones to play with as well. All right, let's switch over to image-based lighting. Okay, I'll leave this up and just throw it on a layer. All right, so instead of me using a light like I was just using there, or a spotlight or a point light, I can go into my render settings and I have some lighting options up here. One of them is called image-based lighting, which is IBL lighting. Okay, or IBL. It's not IBL lighting, it's IBL. So I hit create, and what this is going to do, let's close that, is it creates this sphere around my stuff. And what that sphere is going to do is it's going to allow me to click and map a file here. And I could load in what's called an HDR. And I have a couple HDRs loaded. Okay, room, sphere, ball, HDR, kitchen, hallway. So I'm going to load in just the hallway one. And as I zoom out, it's going to be difficult to see this. Okay, so I'm going to just change some settings here. One of the settings I'm going to change is going to be hardware alpha. I'm going to pull that up. That way I don't see any alpha channel stuff. And then I'm going to take the exposure and pull this up, okay? And then what we're going to see is that this looks kind of funky, okay? And this is actually, it's a half sphere is what it is. So I'm going to change this to spherical to angular. And what this does is it kind of takes it and wraps my half sphere around this whole sphere. It's not going to look perfect, but it'll give us basically lighting information, okay? So this is, if I look at an HDR, this is what it is, a picture of one of these sphere balls. And I've taken it using different stops and exposures, and then I've basically created or put that onto an image, okay? So that's what we're getting here. So what it's going to do is it's going to use that as lighting information. So that as I look at this thing and say, okay, I want to see this thing rendered out, what we should get is something that looks a bit more realistic as far as like the color information. So you can see here it is in this state where we're not getting just like one solid color. We're actually getting like the scenes. The entire scene is kind of contributing to this. Okay, so this is something that's very, very powerful and something that's used extensively in the industry. I'm going to go in here and go to this color gain and just take this color gain value up. Oops, not that much. And what that's going to do is it's just the brightness. Okay, that's how I adjust the brightness of that HDR, that image-based lighting HDR. Okay, so now you can see this is looking much more realistic. I'm not really getting a shadow in here, so I can add in additional lighting. Okay, so I'm using basically this to give me some basic lighting, and then I can go in and grab an area light, and that was way too high. I'm going to move it up that high. There we go. Let's rotate this around. Okay, and you'll see that we lost a little bit of that. So that's where we have to kind of go in here and kind of play this game of ensuring that we're still using the quadratic, still using some of this intensity stuff. Maybe punching in a color on here. because we really just want to get the shadow. And right now I'm getting the color and I'm getting the shadow, which is important. And I could also play with the height of this, just to bring it a little bit closer and emphasize that shadow a little bit more. There we go. Okay. So I could say, okay, well, white obviously is not going to be a good color for this. I should go with something in that realm. So I'm going to go and add a gamma. Okay. And then I'm going to use my swatch and just eyedrop one of these colors that are inside here. Okay. Now, because this is a dark color, I may want to just boost it up. Or take my intensity and pull that up. There we go. All right, so there's that. There is that thing there. Okay. All right, there we go. So that's image-based lighting, and very quickly I can change the entire lighting of my scene or the entire setup of my scene just by picking a different HDR. So this one is this is a picture of my kitchen table, my old kitchen table, and it's basically the same kind of setup. Let me just turn this light off. Do a little re-render. And now you see I have basically a totally different setup here. And what's cool with this too is that, let's say I took this and added a Mia to it. Because right now we're not working with Mias, we're just kind of throwing stuff on here. I want this to be glass. Okay, so I'm just going to show you real quick. I can actually just go to presets and go to physical glass and replace it. And what that's going to do is give it that glass look without me having to go through and punch in a bunch of settings. Okay, so we get this look of glass basically just because our environment is there. We have something kind of going around this entire thing. Now you may not want to render this thing. We may want to just kind of keep it, you know, use the lighting information but not render it out. So I can go to render stats on this thing and say primary visibility is off. So when I render, what I get is everything else except for that background. Okay, which is a very cool way to get some really nice lighting in there and not have to worry about that background type stuff. Okay, so it's just a very, very quick, very powerful way to do that. There's also these kinds of HDRs. These are called lat longs, and they're stretched out. Okay, so it's basically like a panorama of the scene. And we'll go through creating these kinds of things. There's a better example of a lat long. You'll see that this one's actually a smaller one. You could actually use this to light your scene too. Okay. All right, so let me go and delete that. I'm going to go through and I deleted our image-based lighting just by deleting that thing out there. The next one is physical sun and sky. If I click this, it's going to go through and create this physical sky. And I'm going to tell you that this is, it's not an outdated thing, and it's not, you know, people still use it. But you just have to be careful because the stuff that it uses, the setup that it uses is kind of outdated. Okay. So I have the sphere, I have that plane, and you'll see that it also created this directional light. Okay. The directional light doesn't matter where it's at, it just matters where it's pointing. And that pointing is where the sun is coming from. Okay. So let's just render this and see what we get. Alright, super washed out. It's like crazy washed out. Okay. One of the things that this thing will do, if I select my camera here under view, there's a little camera button, and I go to the attribute editor, it puts this exposure on here. Okay, well I don't need this exposure, because what the exposure is doing, if we look down here, is it's gamma correcting it. Okay, so we're doing the gamma correction with the linear workflow. We don't need this thing here. So I'm just going to set that to 1. And then we'll re-render this. Alright, and now we're getting something that's a bit better. Alright, let me also take this material, and I don't want it to be glass right now. I'm just going to make it a matte plastic. There we go. And you'll see that it doesn't do the gamma correction, so I'm just going to add a gamma. There we go. Okay. So, and then I'll also do something on the ground. Let me just assign a Mia to that as well. If you get, like, I get tired of having to go lighting and shading, assign new material. I want to go to favorites and add the Mia here. So I'm going to go to add new material one more time. And what I'm going to do is middle drag the Mia, or right click on the Mia and add to favorites. Okay, you can also middle drag it into favorites, or you can right click and add it to favorites. Okay, so now when I go in here and I go to lighting and shading, assigned favorite, you'll see that the Mia is listed. Okay, write that down so you don't forget it. And then I'm going to go to this and I'll add a gamma. And again, I don't like having to go to gamma, so I can just right click and add that to favorites as well. That way when I go to favorites, there's gamma. And then one more little tip is I hate having to keep typing in 0.454. Okay, so I'm going to go to presets and I'm going to say save gamma preset. I'm going to say 454. Doesn't like numbers in there, so I just type it. Alright, so now when I make a new gamma, let's go back. I'll make a new gamma. I can go to presets, replace, and there they are. Okay, so just workflow speeding up things. That's what we're doing. Write these things down so you kind of have a catalog of all these things that you want to do to make your workflow quicker. Alright, there we go. And I'm just going to take reflectivity down. I'll take glossiness down. There you go. There we go. That's sufficient there. Okay. So what this sun direction thing, that's what this is doing, is it's telling us where the sun's coming from. And as we get closer to this, render it out, we'll see that the shadow is basically going to fall around here because the sun is hitting it at that angle. If I rotate this, okay, that's all I'm doing is rotating it, the sun's going to come in at a different angle and we're going to get like a longer shadow. And you'll also see that it's changed the look of the entire scene. Where before, let's just do a little save. Let's move it to like high noon. Render it out again. Before we were very, very bright. And that wasn't with our coloring, that was just how it was turning out. And then here we're very dark. Okay, so this sun direction is actually something that you could animate and have it look like, you know, the sun's setting and we're getting a different color tone for the entire scene. You'll also see there's a little bit of a sun reflection right there. Here we're not seeing it too much. Actually we are right there. Okay, so we can see it over there as well. Alright, and actually if I rotated it like this and I looked out into the distance, I might be at the right angle. Yep, you can see where the sun's coming from right here. Okay, so that's what this is used for, is to create this look of a sky where it just creates these kinds of blues and oranges and whatever else depending on which time of day it is and where this is located. Okay, so it's actually a very powerful, very cool tool to be able to do this. You just have to watch out for stuff like this. This little tan area is the ground. Okay, that's what they're using as the ground to kind of signify that. So you want to either take all your stuff and just move it so you don't see it, right? Like that. You have to be careful you don't move it up too high into the sky because then it looks funny. Or you need to take your ground plane and just make it enormous to the point where you don't really notice that. Okay, so kind of like that. We could also grab let's grab the sun direction, and you'll see there's a bunch of different tabs with the sun direction that make it do what it's doing. I could take the horizon height and lower it. So -20 would lower that horizon height. Let me just scoot this back in. There we go. So that horizon height is going to be 20 units lower. Scooting the sky down, that's obviously way too much. So then I can adjust and say maybe -5. Okay, so I'm just lowering that horizon height and getting it exactly where, you know, I want it to be. There's also horizon blur. There's the actual color of the ground, so you can choose that. There's night color, so you can adjust that as well. I don't want to go through every single one of these settings because I want you to be able to play with these things or do your own research and getting the end results. Okay. There's also a physical sun, and this is where everything's kind of connected to. But I'm just going to point out one thing in here is that these shadows, let's render this again. These shadows can be pretty harsh. So we could take this softness and take that up more. So 20. Just render that area. And now I'm softening the shadow for that. Okay, and then the samples, just like the samples we're going to see in everything else, is just that smoothness of those shadows. Okay. So now I want to bring back this guy for a minute because this is where we're going to get into some trickier areas. Let's scoot this stuff back down to 0. Scoot this back down. Like 1. Alright, so let's say we had a house here. I'm just putting in some divisions. There we go. And I'm going to take my sun and we're going to have it shine through the window. This is actually way too big of a house for what we're trying to see. Alright, I'm also going to, it's kind of like tighten here. I'm going to click on my select camera and I'm going to go down to my focal length and change this to 20. 20, there we go. And that just kind of makes the camera fit a little bit more stuff into the camera itself. Alright, so now we're going to render this. And what we're going to see is that the light's going to come in the window and it's going to hit here and that's going to try to bounce around inside here. And it's not going to do a very good job. You can see how long this is already taking. It's not going to do an extremely good job of making this look good. Okay, so basically what I need to do is I need to add a little helper to it. Okay, so I'm going to scoot outside the house for a second and I'm going to create an area light. And this area light's going to go right by the window. And I'm actually going to make it just slightly bigger than the window. Because I want to rotate it and angle it basically with the same kind of direction where the sun's coming through. Okay. And I'm going to tell it that it's a portal light. So I'm going to click on that light. I'm going to go down to mental ray. I'm going to click on use light shape. I'm going to click on light shader where it says light shader and click there. I'm going to add in what's called a portal light. There we go. And what this portal light's going to do is it's going to help Maya kind of optimize how it's using its final gather and help push the light into the scene this way. Okay, now I'm still going to have to adjust settings on this. Okay, you can see how it's chugging along, it's doing its thing. Alright, so it's going to still go, it's a little bit more light than we had before. Well, one thing I'm going to do to this is I'm going to take this color multiplier and click on the map for it. And I'm going to assign what's called a MIB black body. Okay, and this MIB black body, you'll see that it has a temperature and an intensity. Okay, well, why does a light have a temperature? Well, if you've studied science at all, light temperature can actually be measured in what's called Kelvin. And it's with a K. And if I clicked on that and it shows it, there it is. Right now where the default is 6500, so if I look at that little picture, 6500 is somewhere in here. So we're going to get this little bluish thing, which gives us more of the day scene, right? So 6500 intensity, right now it's pretty white. So let me just save this and re-render. Okay, so this is still kind of coming out white, but we're kind of flooding in some of that blue, so let's do a back and forth. I'm not seeing a huge difference right now. Let me take this intensity up more, so I'll put the intensity up to 10. And we'll do, I'm just going to re-render out like half of this, like that. My render time is getting up there. It's like 30 seconds for this small frame. So I just have to be very careful as to what I'm doing with that. Okay, we can definitely see a difference now that I'm upping this intensity. Okay, so I'm going to take this up to even 20. And these light intensities are very cool to do this kind of stuff because you just get this really cool coloring to it. You could obviously add the color of blue or whatever, but it's a bit more realistic looking, that's all. Okay. All right, so we're definitely getting something there that's really, I think, looking neat and looking more like the sun's coming through that window. All right. It's still a little bright. I'm not sure why we're seeing that. Why it's so like white out here unless we're hitting just the right spot. Yeah, I need that light shape on. This stuff doesn't apply anymore. Once we did the portal light, this is irrelevant. Once I can turn that to 0, and you'll see that we'll still see light in here. Okay. Once you click the portal light and you connect it to it, this stuff is just, it's like overridden. Okay. Mental ray, use light, visible. Okay, I can't figure out why it's so white. It might just be the direction and what we're seeing over here. I'd have to play with it more to see. Now, I would just be, this is one of those things where you want to be careful with what you're doing. Let me take that down further. When we get into some of the passes and some of these other things that are in the list, some of the stuff down here, we have to just be aware of certain things when we're using this physical sky. Typically, I don't like to use a physical sky for an interior scene. It's kind of like overkill of why, you could just throw a picture of a sky out there instead of trying to use this physical sky. I usually like to use physical sky for exterior scenes. For image-based lighting, I'll use that for lots of different things. Gamma correction, using that for lots of stuff. Okay, so we also covered that color temperature. We also covered light surfaces. So now the next part of this we're going to cover are these three things. Okay. It was the sun out there. That's what was making it so blindingly white. All right. So let's make a new scene. And we're going to go through and just create a very simple scene just so you can see this. Here's a plane. Here's a sphere. And I'm going to go into my render settings and just set this up for color, our linear workflow. Turn File Gather on. Change this to Open EXR. RLE. Perspective 960 by 540. Wonderful. Our quality's already up, so I'm happy with that. And I'm just going to add a couple more objects just in here. I just want to create a simple scene. That's all I want to do. I don't want to complicate things. Alright, so I'm going to take these guys here, and I'm going to assign them. So I'll just do, each one gets their own. This guy. And I'm going to assign a Mia to him. So I'm going to go to my favorites because I added it to the favorite. I'm using X passes. And I'm just going to call this cylinder 1. Okay, and I'll give him a gamma. So I go into my Maya. There's a gamma. I go to my presets, and then I can pick my color. That's a terrible color. I'll just adjust that a bit. There we go. And I'll go to this guy, assign favorites, Mia, add a gamma to him, go to my favorites, I'll give him this like bluey color. There's also this recent, which is really cool. You can just create and assign a Mia shader right there. And then, oops, go with that. Hey. Oh, the ground. Okay. I forgot what I put that last one on. There we go. That one. Yeah, this is exciting stuff, I'm sure. But I want you to see it because this is what it is. There's no glamour in, you know, the fact that we have to do this stuff over and over and over again. It's just that's the way it is. This one I'm going to do glass. And this guy here, assign a Mia. There we go. Okay, so let me hit 6 so I can see what my colors are. It's good. That's the glass one, I believe. Yes. I'm just going to move him over here. Just move that guy over there. So I want to see some of this refraction in there. All right, so now let me render this. I don't have a light in the scene yet. I'll get a light. Okay, so I'm going to create a light. And like I talked about before, I like area lights, so I'm going to use an area light. And then with the area light, I'm going to do use light shape. Rectangle's good. Quadratic decay. Let's put this up to 20. And this is just a guess. You know, 20 is just my guess. If it's too bright, then I knock it down. If it's not bright enough, then I raise it up. And that's obviously not bright enough, so I'm going to bring it up. Okay, so this time I went up to 500. And I can just do like half of a frame and say, oh, it's still not bright enough. I'll go up to, let's say, 2000. And render a little section. It's always good, render little sections. Just marquee, and you click this little box here, and you're good to go. Okay? All right, so now we're getting some reflections. We're getting some different properties. There we go. Reflections, we got some coloring, we got some refraction. That's what the glass is doing, right? We got some shadows in here. Lots of different things that we can play with. All right. I'm going to have this guy here, this one. I'm going to have him glow a little bit. Okay. So, oops, I need to go there. I just need to go to his Mia. I'm going to go down to light linking. Not light linking. Go down to advanced. And under the additional color, I'm going to add in that light mental ray light surface, MIA light surface. There we go. And I'm going to say final gather contribute. Let's put that to 5. Intensity 0.5. And then we'll pick a color for him. And because we're picking a color, we put a gamma on it. He's yellow, so I want to make him yellow. Okay. So now let's render this again and see. Okay. Now it's not totally apparent, but he is glowing. Okay. And I can really push that if I were to take these intensities up higher. There you go. You can really see how he is glowing inside the scene. Okay. So I'm just going to knock this back down to 0.5, 5, and 1 is good for that one. Okay, so now he is glowing, he's there, that's cool. Now, one of the things that we want to do in this little section here is talk about the render passes, render layers, and the new compositing. I want to be able to render this out so that I can adjust my reflections, I can adjust my refractions, I can adjust my coloring, I can adjust lots of different things, okay? So there's 2 areas that we can play with this kind of stuff in, right? One of them is called render layers. Okay, so here's display layers. This is basically like I can grab objects and put them on here and hide them and make them visible. Render layers are different. Render layers is like, what do you want these materials and shaders to look like when they render? Okay, so what I'm going to do is grab everything in my scene like that. And I think I also want to, before I go any further, I'm just going to add an image-based lighting. And I think the hallway sphere will be good. Okay, I'm going to turn off its primary visibility because I don't want to see that. I want to turn the hardware alpha up there, take the color, the exposure up so I can see it. I'll change this to an angular. There we go. Okay. Okay, this is just going to add a little bit to my scene, and that's what I'm just trying to do with it. That's all. Let me render this again just to see where I'm at. Alright, I probably need to take that exposure up a little bit on that. Not the exposure, but the color gain. Let's make it 4. Okay, because I really want it to read in this refractive area here. There we go. So now I'm getting something else besides just black back there, and it's reading a bit more like glass. I'm also going to take the reflections on this thing and just kind of fuzz them out a bit. There we go. Okay, because they're getting fuzzed out, you can see how much brighter they are. So I could also maybe take those reflections down some. Okay, so there we go. So I'm happy with that. Alright, so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take everything in my scene. So I just marquee everything. And I have to shift marquee this. For whatever reason, when I marquee everything, it doesn't grab this. So I'm going to shift marquee that as well. Okay. Alright, so then I'm going to drop this on a new render layer. So I just click this and create new render layer and assign objects. Alright, so now if I click on this, you see that I see all my objects. Now just to show you what render layers can do, I can click my ground, make a new render layer, and just my ground is on this layer. Okay, I'll go back here, go back there. Okay, now the stuff is still there, it's still present, it's just not on this layer. I can then add stuff, like if I can grab this light, right click on layer 3 and add it, so now that light is on here. And I can also grab this, oops, go to my master layer, add it, there we go, and now that's on there. So that when I render, basically what's happening is I'm rendering just the ground with the lighting and that thing. Now I don't have reflections or anything else in here, but just this kind of thing that's inside there, right? So basically I'm isolating elements, and that's what this whole process is allowing us to do. So let me delete this layer. There we go. And I'm going to go to my layer 2, and I'm just going to call this objects. There we go. Okay, so these are render layers, and now I could also go through and on my render layers I could do what are called passes. Okay, so I'm going to go to my render settings, I'm going to go to my passes tab, and I'm going to go to sometimes this thing here is like that and you can't see this button, so I'm just going to expand it so I can see these buttons here. So I'm going to click on create new render pass. Now all of these materials that are inside here are media X passes, and media X passes, basically what happens is it renders out different colors. It renders out like what does the color look like, what do the reflections look like, what do refractions look like, what does the translucence look like, okay? And then it puts all that stuff together. So what we're going to do is separate it all. So I'm going to say I want the diffuse, I want the indirect, I want the reflection, the refraction, I want the specular, I want translucence, and incandescence. That's the one, yep. Okay, and that should be it. Okay, so diffuse, incandescence, indirect, reflection, refraction, specular, translucence. So I'm going to create these. Now this creates them, but right now they're not associated with this objects. So I'm going to hit this chain here, and now these are associated with that. All right. So now when I hit render, you're going to see that this is going to look exactly the same as it did before, with one more caveat that we're seeing here, or we're not seeing here, but it's present. Alright, now that it's done rendering, if I go under File, and I go to Load Render Pass, I'm going to click this little checker thing off, I can load my incandescence. Okay, and you'll see with this incandescence that I'm actually getting that one that we told to glow. I'm getting an image of what it looks like with just that thing. If I click on the diffuse, I'm going to get just the diffuse of this scene. Okay, so you'll see over here I'm not really getting any color, but I am getting the color for this. I'm getting the color for this pink ball. I'm getting the color for the ground. I can click on the indirect, and now I'm getting some of this indirect illumination. That's the final gather bouncing. I can click on reflection and see what the reflections look like. I can click on refraction and see what the refractions look like. I can click on specular and see that the specular is there. I can click on translucence and see the translucence is here, but I don't have any translucence. Okay, so this is helping me isolate all of these objects so that I can play with them later. So I can say, you know what, this reflection is just a bit too harsh overall. I want to isolate these elements and then play with them afterwards. Okay, or I want to downplay the amount of reflection on here or increase it. And here's refraction, same thing. I could play with the amount of refraction on these objects as well. All right. So now these are the basic ones. If I go into Nuke, and we're using Nuke X, always use Nuke X, and right now I'm using 8. So you want to use at least 8. Okay, I'm not going to restore my autosave. Okay, now quick overview of Nuke. Let me let it continue thinking. There we go. Is that in Nuke, we have our toolbar over here. Okay, we have our viewer, we have our timeline, we have a node graph, curve editor, dope sheet type thing here, and then we have our properties. Okay, now it's a pretty simple interface, but it can get very confusing very quickly. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring our file in. Okay, now there's no file, there's an import script, but that's not what we want to do. Okay, we want to read in our file. So we go into the node graph, and I'm going to make sure my mouse is over this, and I'm going to hit R. And R just means read. Okay, so I'm going to go to my desktop. You go to the D drive, but you go to your desktop, and there it is. Oops. And I'm going to go to Sarcona, W14. Now it's single clicking. I'm not double clicking these. You just want to single click it. And I'm going to go to my work folder, my playing around folder, and then my images. And then because I didn't do like a batch render, under my temp folder, I'll have this untitled EXR. Okay, now that was what I was rendering right now, 940, 947. Okay, so that's what that is. So if I click on this, there we go, and then I hit, right now it's not going to show it. Okay, here's that little piece of footage. I'm going to hit the number 1 on it, and that'll connect it to the viewer. Okay, this isn't the piece of footage. Let me click on the folder. It's actually going to be in layer 3. That's right. And there's my untitled EXR. And there's that. Oh, no, right. I shouldn't have created the other one. I put it in my objects. There we go. Whatever layer you called it, I called it my objects layer in Maya, which 2 seconds ago I can't remember that I called it objects, but I did. So objects is the folder for the layer, and then I click on that untitled. Okay, there's no title to the scene. All right, so I'm just kind of moving these things around. I'm using Alt and right mouse button to move this thing around. And I can use Alt middle mouse button to zoom in and out. Okay, so right now I have this render pass kind of out here. If I come up here to the viewer where we have these channels, I can again then see. Here's the diffuse, here's the incandescence, here's the indirect, here's the reflection, and it's a bit more, a bit brighter inside here just because of some of the stuff that Nuke's doing to it. There's a specular, and then again, no translucence. Okay, so I'm going to switch it back to RGBA. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust some of these parameters. Okay, so I'm going to add in what's called a shuffle node. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to hit the tab key and add a shuffle. Okay, now this thing that I just added to this shuffle is essentially over here. Oh, sorry, right here. Shuffle. Okay, so I can also do it there. If I delete this and I make sure I'm clicked on this and go up here and go to shuffle, there's that shuffle. Okay, so I'm just scooting it off to the side, and I'm going to go into my RGBA and change this to diffuse. Okay, so what this shuffle does is it pulls out I'm just kind of adjust this a little bit. It extracts the diffuse channel from this. This EXR has all this stuff in here. It has an RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha, but it also has the diffuse as its own channel. So I can pull it out and look at just the diffuse. So what I'm going to do is click off of this. I'm going to add in another shuffle node. Okay, so here it is, just kind of floating around. I have to connect it. I say, okay, I want to get the information from here. So I click it there. I double click this shuffle just to make sure I have it. And then I go through and say I want to grab the incandescence. Now this didn't change. If you look, this shuffle is connected to the viewer. Okay, so this shuffle, I need to just connect this to that. So now I'm seeing the incandescence. All right. Now shuffle 1, shuffle 2, I don't know what, which ones these are called without double clicking it and saying, oh, this is diffuse. Oh, this one's incandescence. So I want to rename it up here. So I'm just going to call it incan. I don't need to call it anything else. Double click this shuffle and call this one diffuse or diff. Okay. So I'm going to click off, add in another shuffle, click the arrow to this. Make sure I'm on that one and go to indirect. I can click on number 1, indirect. Okay. Now, anytime I'm doing these clickings and hotkeys, I'm making sure that I'm in this view here. If I'm up here and I were to, let's say, hit R, because that's the read, you'll see that this just turns grayscale. And what's showing me here is the red channel. Here's the green channel with G. Here's the blue channel with B. So I just hit B again or G again or whatever to get it back to RGBA. You can see it's changing up here. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and add in all of these kinds of things. And I'm just going to let the video keep going so you can see how I'm just adding in a shuffle, connecting it, and then going to the next one on the list. This one's reflection. And I click off, shuffle, refraction. Okay, now if I accidentally click here and go to shuffle and say, oops, I accidentally connected this, I can just pull this arrow off. Okay, and now it's not connected. Then I can go to specular, click off, shuffle. I think I grabbed them all. Oops. See, and right now it's not listing anything here because it's not connected to it. So once I connect it, then I'll get it. Translucence, but I don't really have any translucence, but I'll just connect it just so you can see the process. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to tap the space bar, and that makes this bigger. Tap the space bar again, makes it smaller. So this is going to get kind of cluttered, so I'm going to do something just to kind of make this a little bit nice and neater. Okay, first thing I'm going to grab all these and hit L. Okay, and then move this down. L lines things up. Nice straight line. Perfect. Okay. Next I'm going to click on this, hit the tab key, and type in dot. Okay, and all that does, it creates a dot. That's all it does. There we go. Okay. And this dot node is just something to help us keep organized. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just disconnect all of these. Okay. I'm going to connect this guy here, hold the control key, and pull this yellow diamond up. Okay, that adds a dot automatically. Alright, hold control again, click a dot right here, click a dot right there. So I'm clicking dots just so that I can add these things to these dots. And I'm moving these so that they're nicely lined up. So again, I'll click the incandescence here, hold control, and then just add some dots in and connect the dots to these lines. Perfect. Okay, so you see how much nice and neat that is compared to what we had before. Tap the space bar again. Okay, so now if I were to click on incandescence and hit 1, diffuse hit 1, indirect hit 1. Okay, you can see how at any one of these I can hit 1 and see what is inside there. Okay, so then what I need to do is add them in together. Okay, because right now they're just kind of separate. Right here, they're all like joined together into this. I extracted them out, so now I need to add them back together to get that original image. So I'm going to click on these two, and under this guy there's a merge. Right here, hotkey is M, so I'm just going to click on these two and hit M for merge. And what this does is it's just like Photoshop or After Effects, where it's actually taking this information and putting it together. Okay. Now it's doing that with an over. So you might have seen like multiply before. You might have seen overlay or screen. Okay. We're going to use plus. Okay. Plus is the approved method for adding these things together. Okay. And it's literally taking the pixel information from this one and adding it to the pixels of that one. All right. So I'm going to click on this merge, hit M, and then you'll see that I get this merge plus, and I get this B hanging out. I'm going to click that to indirect. Okay, so now this viewer is automatically connected to this one. So if I go here or here, you can see the difference. And again, I'm going to add this to a plus. There we go. I'm going to click on this merge and hit M. Add the reflections in. Change it to a plus. You're not going to see a difference with plus. It's just the way you want to do it, though. Okay, so I'm just adding in each one of these things and changing it to plus. Click the merge, merge. Change it to plus. Okay, so now if I go back to this one, let's say I hit 1 on this one, and I hit the 1 on this one, you'll see that there's a slight difference happening. So 1, 1, okay? And the difference is happening on this guy here, all right? Now I've used this incandescence. I don't really need to use this incandescence, okay? This one here is where it's going to glow. I don't need to use that as one of my things, okay? So incandescence is usually like an extra thing that I'll use. So I'm just going to disconnect incandescence, and I'm going to delete this merge right here and just leave it like that, okay? So incandescence is just kind of like on its own. All right, so there's that. And here's that, and you'll see there is a little bit of a difference here, still in that. Maybe a setting wrong inside Maya that's just kind of causing that. It's not a huge deal. I did add the incandescence back in here. It's just odd that it's causing that to do that. I can adjust it, and this is one of the benefits of it. We should be able to get it back to this exact thing, but for whatever reason it's not working this very second. Alright, but the cool thing is that we can adjust it afterwards. Alright, so let's say that this incandescence, we want it to be a bit brighter, okay, just in this area. So what I can do is go to this incandescence and hit G. We come over here just so you can see where it's at, right here. There's a grade node, and that grade node is kind of like just an overall adjustment, okay? So I add this grade node in, and I can do stuff like multiply it. So you can see how I can make it brighter, okay? So then we can get it closer to what that other one looked like. I could also go in and do a gain, where I'm making it brighter or darker. Okay, so this is one of the benefits of having this stuff separated, is that we can really play with it and adjust what these things are looking like. I could also go through and, let's say, like we talked about before with our reflections, I'm not really seeing a whole lot of reflections on the ground, even though they're there. No, they're still there. It's just the other stuff is just kind of. Oops. This stuff is just kind of making it blend in a bit more. Okay, and sometimes you have to do that where you just kind of go through and look at it. Now I'm using D, so I'm clicking on the merge and hitting D, and that disables the merge. Okay, if I go to reflection, disable it, it's going to give me different results. So I just disable that merge on and off, just so I can see what it looks like. Okay, so let's go through and do that. I can go through this reflection, and I can add a G for grade. Okay, so the grade's in between these two, and then I can pull that down. Okay, if I pull it to 0, we'll see that we have no reflections. If I pull it up, you can see how I'm really getting a lot more reflections now. You can really see the reflections are a lot more apparent in these items. And I can disable that grade just so you can see the before and after. Nuke is a crazy powerful tool. You really have to play with it and appreciate some of the stuff that it can do. Alright, so I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add in a glow node. Okay, and it's going to add all the stuff in. Oops. Sorry, I'm going to hit tab and type in glow. There we go. And it adds a glow to basically everything. Alright, it has a tolerance here, so I can play with the tolerance. But I'm going to use this width channel. And I'm going to say I want to use the width channel's indirect incandescence. There we go. I'm going to say use the red channel of incandescence. And what that's going to do is basically, if we remember what the incandescence looked like this, there is some red in here. And red, if we look down here where these red, green, and blue colors are as I move my mouse over, you'll see that red is the dominating color. All right. So as I come down to the glow, and I'm looking at this, I'm using the red channel as where this is glowing. So I can take this and brighten it up. I can still play with the tolerance some. I can tint it too. I can desaturate. But now I'm making this glow in this area based on this glow, based on this incandescence red channel. Okay? And then I can adjust, also how far out it's going to glow. Okay? I can also take my refractions. This is where we have to be kind of careful. But let's say I wanted my refractions to just be a little bit less. So I'm going to go here and say, we'll do a grade again. And as I take this down, you'll see that basically we're getting this back to this purpley color inside here. So you just have to be kind of careful that, we're not getting too much there. Okay, that we go back and basically erase everything that we did on it. Okay. There we go. So I'm just going to leave that where it was. There's other stuff that we can do too to really enhance what this is looking like. If I go back to Maya and we look at this, this is what it looks like in Maya, and that's what it looks like inside Nuke. And I'm just going to check my color management here. Oops, see, I forgot to change this to my color management to linear. There we go. So that's what we're actually looking like, and you'll see that that's our rendering, and this is our other one. Okay, so we've adjusted it a little bit. Okay, now we're going to add some other passes into this as well. So I'm going to click on my create new pass. Ambient occlusion is one I'm going to add. Depth, camera depth, where is it? And you'll see there's two, remapped and depth. I'm going to add both of those. And then again, use the link to associate them. Alright, so now when I render this, and let me just see this real quick. That. I added, we had the intensity set to 0.5. I added it back to 1 to see if maybe that'll help it. Okay, so now I've re-rendered this. So all I have to do is go back to Nuke and then come up here to my read and reload it. Okay, so that got a bit brighter. Let me take the glow off just by scooting this over and viewing the merge. And I can disable that grade. Oops, let me disable these other things too, just so I can see. I still lost some color there. I'll have to play with that and see why we've lost color. Okay. Oops. Right, so now we have this glow here. And I'm just going to scoot the glow down in the viewer. Okay. And I'm going to add in another shuffle node. So I'm going to pull it over here and just go to shuffle. And I want to connect this to this dot. Okay. I don't want to intersect everything like this because that's just sloppy. So I'm going to hold control, pull a dot out, bring this down to about here. Here. Pull another dot out and just slide this over. Okay. This is just keeping it nice and neat. And then this guy is going to be the ambient occlusion. Alright, so let's look at the ambient occlusion and see what it looks like. I click AO, I hit 1, and right now we're not really seeing anything. Okay, it's perfectly white, and it shouldn't be white. Alright, so we'll get to what that's supposed to look like after we get this going. I'm going to add in another merge, not merge, shuffle. I'm going to click on that, bring it here, drag this down, and then this one is going to be camera depth. Remember, we have 2, so let's look at remapped first. So I'm going to go there and hit 1, and what this is showing us is the depth of our objects from the camera. So if I hold my mouse over here, you'll see that these numbers, right now it's at 0.0139. As I bring it up further and further, those numbers are getting greater and greater, okay? Until we get to basically 0 way in the back. So 0.075 is the furthest, 0.01 something is the closest, okay? So if I change this to, let me just type depth here. If I change this to camera depth, you'll see that it's solid white, all right? But these numbers are a lot higher. This is going from 14 here to 75 there. All right, now this is real world units as far as how far this stuff is from our scene. So here we're getting something that's much more accurate than we do when we change this to camera depth remapped. Because here it's basically like kind of clamping these so we can see them. Now if I go to this camera depth remapped, yes, I can see that these numbers are working, but I want to see what it's looking like. So I can use this up here. This is the gain. And as I slide that, you can see what it's looking like. Okay? Let me click this F20. I can also play with this, and sometimes you can get that to work too, but that doesn't seem to want to work. Alright, so now that we have this, we use it. I like to use the camera depth, not the remapped. So just so you know for future, camera depth is the way to go. Let me hit tab again just so I can kind of fix some of this stuff. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to take this depth, I'm going to put it into the chain. Okay, so instead of merging it, because I don't want to merge it, what I want to do is copy this information. So I'm going to hit K for copy. Oops. And I'm just going to drag this so that it intersects with this white line. Okay, now that it's intersected with that white line, I can go over to here and say I want to copy the red channel to the depth channel. Okay, now just trust me when I say that when we look at this depth, if you look at these values down here, you see that the red, green, and blue are always exactly the same. Okay, so when I'm copying the red, it's just because red was the first one in the list. I could have used green or blue. Okay, so now after I've done that, I'm going to hit K, not K, I'm going to hit tab and type in Z defocus. Okay, and what this Z defocus is going to do is it's going to do like a depth of field. Okay, so I get a focal point, I move the focal point to what I want in focus, and you'll see how this is in focus, and the other stuff is getting out of focus. Okay, so what I can do is go to this output, change this to focal plane setup. You'll see the red is out of focus, the blue is in focus. So I'm going to take this and just adjust the size. Oops, that's the size of the blur. I want to adjust the depth of field. And this green is what's actually in focus, right? So as I increase this more, I'm getting more stuff that's in focus. That's what I want to do. So let me take this focal plane setup to back to result. And now I'm getting stuff that's really in focus, and then it's kind of fuzzing out there. Now you'll also notice that it's kind of like croppy back here where it just looks like splotchy, because if we look at our depth and we're going from these values of like 75 to nothing, if I zoom in and I get closer, you'll see here's 26, and then over here it's like 7 and then 3 and then 0. Okay, if I pull this down, you can kind of see how it's doing what's called anti-aliasing to this and trying to blend all these pixels in nice and neat. Okay, we'll look at more ways to kind of optimize things as we go in the semester, but for now we're just doing this very basic setup. So for now we also want to go back to the Z to focus, use this as a very slight thing. So I'm just going to take these sizes down so we still have some depth of field to it, but just not as much. Okay, and then I can add my glow. There it is. All right, so now let's get this AO working, because right now the AO isn't working at all. So I'm going to go back to Maya. And the reason the AO isn't working is because under my render settings, under features, there's this ambient occlusion box. That has to be checked. We can't just turn a pass on like AO and get it to render, okay? So we have to actually tell it we were rendering ambient occlusion. So now I'll render this again. Okay, so now we went from an 18-second render to a 48-second render, okay, just by adding the ambient occlusion. Now we don't even know if it works, okay? So I can also, remember, I don't have to keep going back to Nuke. I can go here to load render pass and change it to AO and look at it from here, okay? This is kind of what we want the ambient occlusion to look like, but not totally. We're getting too much gray in here. This should be more of like a black and white, but we'll see what we can do inside of Nuke with it. All right, so let's go back to Nuke. And I'll double click, oops, not that. I'll double click my read and say reload. There it is. Okay, now remember we can add that grade on here. So if I click on the AO, I hit G for grade, and then I go to multiply. Okay, maybe I'll play with the gain a little bit. Well, it's just not giving me the look that I want. All right, let's go back to Maya. All right, now there's some options in all of these here. If I double click my depth remap, you'll see that there's options here for the near clipping plane and the far clipping plane. Okay, that's why in here, when we're looking at depth, now let me change this to depth remapped. Why these numbers are so low, 0.02 to 0.07, because it's basically mapping out. It's putting a grayscale image from where the camera is all the way back 1,000 units. So that's why these numbers are so tiny. And if we look, this is probably about 80 or so, let's say 100. So if we look, I could actually probably crop this far clipping plane to 100, and we'll get more, a better view of what that's supposed to look like. Okay, where'd my box go? All right, so I changed that far clipping plane on the depth remap to 100 just so you can see it. Also on AO, if I double click this, we have use local AO settings. That's what I want to do. I'm going to say use local settings, and my maximum distance, I usually start off at 5, and then we go from there. My spread, I'm going to put to 0.8. That's just a standard setting that I always throw in there. And then I'm going to render this again. All right, so now we're down to 24 seconds, possibly because we changed these settings, possibly because we're a little bit further away. We'll find out. All right, so let's go and look at our AO. Much more what we want. Okay, we really want to get these white values. Like everything else is white except for like where we're making contact. And that's where we want those black values to be. All right, so let's go back to Nuke, and let's go back up here, double click, reload. Okay, you'll notice how it moved all our stuff into the other spot. All right, now let's look at the depth first while we're here. So now instead of getting those 0.02 values, we're getting like 0.1 all the way to, all right, stop updating, come on. Oh, like halfway through it just stops generating any values. There it goes. It's like got locked up, I guess. All right, so we're going all the way from 0.1 to like 0.6 or 0.7. Okay, so we just get a different view of that just based on kind of clamping those values in there. But again, I still like to use the depth because we don't have to play with those values. All right, so let's go to the AO. Okay, and I can delete that grade. That's much more what I want this to look like. All right, so here's the before look of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge in the AO, but I'm going to multiply it. So I'm going to hit the AO and go to multiply. And you'll see there's a math and a merges. They're the same thing, except the merge or the math one has this stuff here. If I go to merges, I basically get the merge node with multiply automatically selected. Okay, so I'm just going to go, oops, connect that in there. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an AB like 1, 2 situation. I'm going to click on the multiply, hit 1, click on the node above it, hit 2, and then what I can do is click off and then do 1, 2, 1, 2, and see what it looks like with and without. Okay, so you can see that that ambient occlusion just adds what's called a contact shadow. Okay, it's kind of hard to see. Are these objects actually touching the ground? Are they floating? The reflection definitely helps, but it's a bit hard to see. Adding that ambient occlusion in, there's like no doubt now. It's like, okay, that's definitely making contact with it. Okay, so we always want to have ambient occlusion in there. And then there's our focus, there's our glow. Knock that down a little bit. All right, there we go, beautiful. Okay, so now typically what the process is we go through and close those. We go through and we'll create this node. We read our file in, we broke apart all of our passes here, and then we merged them all in, we adjusted them some. Okay, we added in our ambient occlusion, we added in our Z defocus, we added in our glow, and then what I want to do is just kind of tidy it up at the end. Okay, and I like to add a little vignette to the end of this. That way we get a little bit of just some cool so it helps kind of focus our attention on the inside of this and see, you know, it helps. So you'll see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I want to add basically like an After Effects. You would add a mask in here. So I'm going to take this thing here and I'm just going to add in a merge. Okay, so I just clicked off and added in merge. And I'm going to click the A on this and drag the A off. And then I'm going to click the B. Because you see what I'm doing is I'm actually merging the same item on top of itself. Okay, and then I'm going to change this to a multiply. And then if I view it, you'll see, wow, we get this crazy look. All right, well, I kind of want that crazy look, but not all over. I want to kind of isolate it to this. All right, so a mask inside of Nuke is actually a roto. So I'm going to just click off of this and add in a roto. Okay, and this roto is just going to be here. And it's just like the pen tool in After Effects. I'm just clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. And then the end one, I just click. Okay, cool. So we have this. So what I'm going to do is, if you look on this multiply, there's a tiny little arrow right here that says mask. All right. So I'm just going to drag this tiny little arrow over to roto. There it is. And you'll see that this inside mask is the dark area and the outside mask is the light area. I want that opposite. So I'm going to click over here on my roto. There's an inverted. Well, it says not inverted. I click it and now it's inverted. So then what I can do is take this. And it's kind of like a cool thing. There's a little like line sticking out. I'm going to grab this and pull it out. Now that's my feathering. So now it's going to create, instead of this hard transition, it'll create a soft transition. So I click that, pull it out. Click that, pull it out. Okay, now I can also pull this middle line here. There we go. So now what we get is very, very cool. We get this dark area and it kind of comes into this light area. Alright, so let's look at it before and after of roto. So I go to the glow, and then I go to my multiply. Oops, sorry. 1 on glow, 2 on multiply. So I do 1, 2. You can see how it kind of really seals the deal on what this is looking like. It kind of frames it a little bit better and makes it feel like it's more of a completed piece. Okay? Very cool. Alright, now here's the extra cool thing about this whole setup. Let me save this before I get any further. Just hit Control S. Composite, whatever. This whole setup here can be saved and reused. Okay, so this here that we're using, this is just a read node. So all I have to do if I want something else is read something else in. And if I go and find another EXR, which I'm pretty sure I have one somewhere, 2560 work. Or I had one in there. I probably put it somewhere else. Alright, I'm back. So if I go back to here, I added this other image here. And this is just a little droid type thing for the Nuke compositing class. basically their first assignment is to do like basically this. Okay, so all I have to do is I go down here and I just connect this to that, and then I go through and say, okay, where is my stuff? Oh, I rendered it through V-Ray, which is different, but all I have to do is come in and say, okay, well, where's my incandescence? And then pick my incandescence. Where is my diffuse? And then pick my diffuse. There it is. Where's my indirect? Pick my indirect. Where's my reflection? Okay. And then as I'm doing this, I'm extracting these things. Okay. I'm just going to undo that because I don't want to do that for this specific one. Okay. So you can use this same script and just kind of load in the new one and then update your passes, and then all this other stuff that's connected will work for it. All this stuff that's connected will still work for it. You just have to tell it, you know, these are my shuffles, these are where I want to connect these things to, and then adjust things like, here's the grade on reflection. You may not want that to be the same. Here's a grade on refraction. Here's a grade on incandescence. Here's a grade on, or a multiply on that. Okay, so you play with those things. There's a glow. All right, the roto might be in a different spot a little bit. Okay, so we brought this in by reading a node in. We're taking this out by writing a node. So I go to write, and oops, over here I'm going to click on the folder, and where does it want to go? Let me hit the back button, and I'm going to say I like to make a new folder called nuke out, and I'm going to call this playing around dot pound 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 dot tiff. Okay. Now the reason I did the dot pound 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 is for an animation. Okay. If we're just doing a single frame, I can just do playing around dot tiff. But eventually we're going to be doing animation, so we would do dot pound 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 dot tiff. Okay. And then I would hit render. And it would say frame range 1 to 1. Yep, that's all I have. Okay. So there it goes. So now it rendered that out. So if I go into my images, nuke out, there's that playing around tiff. I can't read it because it's whatever, some stupid reason I can't read it. But I can open this up in FCheck or FCheck with Photoshop. Windows Photo Viewer is there, but it's going to be like blurred out. Yeah. So we'll just leave it like that. All right, but it would render it out, and then I'd be able to turn that file in. Okay, or I could say I want to take this and make it a JPEG. So I just change this to JPG. It changes the settings down here. I can up this here, whatever. Okay, TIFF is typically a good one to render out. Just one F here. All right. Now, if you're bringing in a sequence, let's say we rendered a sequence of this out. What we would want to do is we can either just delete that and just read a new sequence in and say, you know, let me go to the one that I have. Projects. Okay, it's going to read a sequence in like this, where here's my droid sequence. It's saying it's 1 to 120, so it automatically kind of puts it into a sequence like that. And then I could just connect it into that chain. Okay, so obviously I don't want to do that because I have the other one. There we go. But that's what we would want to do. And if we had stuff like depth of field that we were animating, we could animate this focus point. And animation inside Nuke is very simple. You just kind of go to, here's my focus plane, that's what we're adjusting. I would right click and say set a key. And I would go up to, let's say, 100. I would move my focal point, and then it automatically sets a key. So it automatically knows to go there. Now it's not going to animate the focal point moving, but it will animate the focus plane. So if I look at the focus plane setup, as I'm looking at this, you'll see how that's animating. Okay, so that's it. All right, cool. All right, so that is, if we look back at our PDF, that covers everything that's inside this second list here. Now, it's not an extensive thing. I wanted you to get an idea of it, because you'll go through each assignment and there's going to be different ways you're going to be using Nuke and different ways you're going to be using some of these things. But I want you by the end of this class to understand how to composite Nuke, how to use render layers and passes, and use light surfaces, and all of these kinds of things. So throughout the semester, you're going to be creating something that showcases this kind of stuff. Okay? All right, so that's it for video 2.